For 40 years, I gave my adopted son everything: my home, my name, my life savings. When he and his wife decided my time was up, they didn't just ask me to move into a nursing home. They threatened me, gaslight me, and planned to steal everything. They made one mistake. They thought my age was my weakness. It turned out to be my most dangerous weapon. This is the story of how I took back my life. If you believe that respect for our elders is non-negotiable, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because you won't want to miss a single detail. The sun was bleeding out across the horizon, painting the underside of the clouds in shades of bruised orange and deep purple. From my worn wicker chair on the porch, I could smell the rich, damp earth of the fields, a scent more familiar to me than my own reflection. For 45 years, that smell meant life. It meant another season, another harvest, another day of honest work. This land wasn't just dirt and crops. It was a living testament to 45 years of sweat, sacrifice, and a promise I made to a little boy with scared eyes and a name that wasn't mine. I remember the day I met him like it was yesterday, 3 years old, clinging to the social worker's leg, his knuckles white. I knelt down, my own hands calloused and rough from the fields, and showed him a ladybug crawling on a blade of grass. That was the first time he looked at me without fear. From that day on, I gave him my name, my home, and every ounce of love a father could give. I thought that was enough. Standing on that porch, watching the light fade, I was still foolish enough to believe it would always be enough. The screen door creaked open behind me, a sound as old as the house itself. It was Chloe, my daughter-in-law, wiping her hands on a floral apron that was too bright for the coming dusk. "Arnold, dinner's ready," she said. Her voice was a carefully constructed melody of sweetness, the tune she'd perfected over the years. "I made your favorite, roast chicken with rosemary potatoes." I nodded slowly, my gaze lingering on the dark line of trees at the edge of the property. "Smells good, Chloe." "Thank you." Inside, the warm light of the dining room felt artificial. My son, Ethan, was already at the table, his face illuminated by the blue glare of his phone. The rapid, silent motion of his thumb scrolling was the only sign of life. He was a successful accountant, sharp and ambitious. But in my house, he often reverted to the sullen silence of a teenager being forced to eat with his parents. "Hey, Dad," he mumbled, not looking up. "Ethan," I replied, taking my seat at the head of the table. The dinner was, on the surface, a portrait of domestic tranquility. The chicken was perfectly roasted, the skin crispy and the meat tender. The potatoes were fluffy. Chloe, playing the part of the perfect hostess, filled the silence with cheerful, meaningless chatter. She talked about a lavish trip her friends were taking to Italy, describing their photos with a wistful sigh. She mentioned a new luxury SUV a neighbor had just bought. A daddy had resend. Every story seemed to have a price tag attached, a subtle reminder of a world of comfort and ease that felt a million miles away from the quiet toil of our farm. I watched them over the rim of my water glass. I watched the way Chloe's smile never quite reached her eyes, how it was an expression she put on, like her apron. I watched the way Ethan's jaw was clenched, the muscle jumping periodically as he chewed. He wasn't just eating, he was refueling, eager to get this chore over with. When I tried to ask him about a difficult client he'd mentioned last week, he just shrugged. "It's handled, Dad. Just numbers." The conversation died. There was a current of impatience running just beneath the polished surface of our meal, a palpable feeling that my presence, my slow way of eating, my very existence, was an obligation to be endured before they could retreat back into their own world of screens and whispered plans. I took another bite of chicken. It was seasoned perfectly, but it tasted like ash in my mouth. Later that night, a sound pulled me from a shallow, restless sleep. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was a low, rhythmic, scraping sound. Scrape, thud. Scrape, thud. I lay perfectly still in the heavy darkness, my ears straining. The old farmhouse groaned and settled around me. Familiar sounds I could identify in my sleep. This was different. This was a foreign sound, an intrusion. From the foot of my bed, my old golden retriever, Buster, let out a low, guttural growl, the fur on his neck bristling. That was all the confirmation I needed. Something was wrong. I slipped out from under the covers, the old floorboards chilling the soles of my bare feet. I moved with a slowness born of age and a sudden, inexplicable dread. I crept to the window that overlooked the backyard, making sure to stay to the side, shielded by the heavy floral curtain my late wife had sewn. The moon was nearly full, bathing the yard in a cold, silvery light that made everything look strange and spectral. It cast long, skeletal shadows from the great oak tree we'd planted when Ethan was 5. And there, near the back fence, under the gnarled branches of that same tree, were 2 figures. My breath caught in my throat. A painful, sharp gasp. It was Ethan and Chloe. Ethan was holding a shovel, his shoulders straining with the effort. He drove it into the earth with a grunt that carried on the still night air. Scrape. Thud. Chloe stood beside him, holding a small, dark metal box. She held it away from her body, as if it were something foul, something she didn't want to touch. She kept glancing back at the dark windows of the house, her face a pale oval of paranoia in the moonlight. They were whispering, their words stolen by the distance. But their movements were frantic, hurried, like thieves in the night, like they were burying evidence, like they were hiding a crime. I stood there, frozen, a statue of disbelief in my own home. 100 frantic thoughts screamed through my mind. I should run out there, flick on the floodlights, shout, demand to know what in God's name they were doing. But my legs felt like they were cast in concrete. My mind, a lifetime of trust, warring with the unbelievable sight before me, simply shut down. It was my son, my boy, in the dead of night, digging a hole in the yard he grew up in. It was a scene from a nightmare, a poisonously vivid dream. And I couldn't seem to wake up. I watched, hidden and helpless, until they filled the hole, tamping down the earth with their feet. They scattered a few loose leaves over the top, a clumsy attempt at camouflage. Then, they hurried back inside, swallowed by the darkness of the house, leaving a small, dark scar on the moonlit lawn, a scar on my heart. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I just sat in a wingback chair by the window, my eyes fixed on that patch of disturbed earth, until the first gray light of dawn began to creep over the fields. The next morning, the kitchen was filled with the smell of brewing coffee and a terrifying, cheerful normality. It was so jarringly normal, it felt like a scene from a play. Chloe was humming a pop song as she buttered toast. Ethan was at the table, scrolling through the news on his tablet, a picture of domestic bliss. They acted as if the secret ceremony in the moonlight had never happened, As I walked in, my movements stiff and slow. Chloe turned, her smile bright and brittle. "Dad, you look tired. Did you sleep well?" I stared at her, at the incredible, effortless lie sitting so comfortably on her face. How could she look me in the eye? I managed a slow, deliberate nod. Just an old man's aches and pains. The damp gets in my bones. Ethan looked up from his tablet. His expression, a carefully crafted mask of mild concern. "You should take it easy today. Dad, don't overdo it in the fields." I drank the coffee she poured for me. It was hot and strong. But the bitterness felt different today. It felt like the bitterness of betrayal scalding my throat. Every normal action, the clink of a spoon against a mug, the rustle of the newspaper felt like a betrayal of the terrible truth I now carried. They were strangers. They were strangers, living in my house, wearing the faces of my family. And I had to sit across the table from them and pretend I didn't know. The moment their car crunched down the long gravel driveway, heading off to their respectable jobs in the city, I was moving. The facade of the frail old man dropped away. I went to the shed, my hands steady now, and grabbed the spare shovel. My heart was no longer frantic. It was a heavy, cold drum beating a rhythm of grim purpose. I walked to the spot by the back fence. The scattered leaves were a pathetic joke. The earth was clearly disturbed. I started digging. The work was hard, my breath coming in ragged puffs of steam in the cool morning air. But I didn't feel the strain. I dug with a desperate, focused energy, needing to see, needing to know for certain. After a few minutes of tearing into the soil, the shovel hit something with a dull, metallic clank. The sound vibrated up the wooden handle and into my bones. I dropped to my knees, ignoring the dampness of the ground, and scraped away the last of the dirt with my bare hands until I uncovered the small, metal strongbox. It was cold and heavy. It wasn't locked. My hands trembled as I fumbled with the latch and lifted the lid. Inside, laid out like sacred artifacts in a tomb, was the legal architecture of my entire life, my original will. The one that left everything, the farm, the savings, the machinery, everything to Ethan, my beloved son. The deed to the farm, free and clear. The paper my father had passed to me, and I had planned to pass to his grandson, my life insurance policy. A substantial document with Ethan listed as the sole beneficiary. They were stealing my legacy. They were waiting for me to die. But then I saw it, tucked underneath everything else. A folded bundle of papers, tied with a faded blue ribbon. I recognized it instantly. It was a letter. A long, rambling letter I had written to my late sister, Sarah, 2 years ago. On the anniversary of her death, it was a tradition of mine, a way to talk to her, to keep her memory close. I never sent them. I kept them in my personal safe in the study. In this one, I had poured out my heart, my growing unease about Ethan's obsession with money, about Chloe's subtle, poisonneux manipulation. I wrote of my quiet fears that they saw me not as a father, but as an obstacle, a gatekeeper to the wealth I had built. They had broken into my private safe, read my most secret and vulnerable thoughts, and then buried them out here to rot. This wasn't just about money. This was a desecration. I sat there on the damp earth, the cold of the metal box seeping through my jeans, and the world tilted on its axis. The sun felt weak and distant. Every warm memory I had of raising that boy, teaching him how to drive the old farm truck, his hands shaking on the wheel, the pride that swelled in my chest as I paid his final college tuition bill, the hug he gave me at my wife's funeral. It all curdled in my gut, turning sour and rotten. I had given him a life, and in return, he was methodically, secretly, trying to erase mine. I wasn't his father anymore. I was a problem to be managed, a financial burden to be shed. A few days passed in a suffocating haze of forced smiles and hollow conversation. The knowledge of what they'd done sat in my chest like a block of ice. I played my part, the slow, slightly confused old man. Then, one evening, Ethan cornered me. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, his face arranged into a look of serious concern. He cleared his throat, a sound heavy with false sincerity. "Dad, we need to talk about finances." I just looked at him, my face a carefully blank canvas, and waited. "The thing is," he continued, leaning forward and lowering his voice as if sharing a grave secret, "this farm, it costs a lot to run. The property taxes went up again. The upkeep is relentless. The roof needs repairs. Dad, that's 15 grand right there. The tractor's transmission is shot. Your pension. It helps. But it's just not enough anymore. We're bleeding money here, trying to keep this place afloat for you." It was the first move, the first volley in their campaign of attrition. The lies were skillful, wrapped in a blanket of concern. The roof was fine. The tractor needed a tune-up, not a new transmission. They were building their case, brick by brick, for why I was no longer fit to manage my own affairs. I didn't argue. I just nodded slowly, letting my shoulders slump a little, letting him think his words were landing on the fertile ground of an old man's fear. The next morning, I came downstairs to find a glossy, trifold brochure lying on the kitchen counter. It was placed strategically, right next to the sugar bowl where I couldn't possibly miss it. The cover showed smiling, silver-haired seniors playing shuffleboard on a pristine, sun-drenched lawn. Inelegant, curling script. The name read, "Golden Meadows Retirement Community, a New Chapter of Care." Chloe had left it there for me to find. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat, a promise of the neat, tidy, and powerless future they had planned for me once they had everything else. I picked it up. The slick paper felt cold and heavy in my hand. I stared at the smiling faces of the actors on the cover. They thought this was the end of my story. They thought they were closing the book. As I stood there in the quiet morning light, the cold fury in my chest finally began to solidify into something hard and sharp. They had no idea. This wasn't the last chapter. This was the beginning of a whole new book, and I was the one who was going to write it. I didn't throw the brochure away. That would have been a reaction, an emotional outburst, and the time for raw emotion was over. I was a different man now. A man who had stood by a shallow grave in his own backyard and seen the truth of his life buried there. I calmly folded the glossy paper in half and placed it on the small table by the door, right where they would see it. Let them think their seed of suggestion was taking root. My performance had to begin somewhere. And so, in the days that followed, I began to fade. I became a ghost in my own home. A little slower, a little more distant. The psychological campaign they had started now had a willing participant, though not in the way they imagined. I would misplace my reading glasses and spend 5 minutes patting my pockets before Chloe would find them for me, right on top of my head. "Oh, Dad, you're getting so forgetful," she'd say, her voice dripping with a cloying, patronizing sympathy. She would exchange a quick, triumphant look with Ethan. a flash of shared victory that made my stomach turn. I would just give her a weary, grateful smile and thank her. I'd ask what day it was. Even when I knew perfectly well, I'd stand in the middle of the kitchen, looking into the open pantry as if I'd forgotten what I came for. Each act of feigned confusion was a carefully placed brick in the wall of their narrative, the story of the senile old man who was becoming a danger to himself. They were so eager to believe it. They never once questioned the authenticity of my decline. Their greed made them blind. The campaign escalated a week later. Chloe announced over dinner that she had made an appointment for me with our family physician, Dr. Evans. Just a checkup. Dad, she said, spooning mashed potatoes onto my plate. We're just worried about you. We want to make sure you're getting the best care. The doctor's office was sterile and smelled of antiseptic, a place where life was measured in numbers on a chart. Dr. Evans was a good man, I thought. A bit overworked. Perhaps. But he'd known our family for 20 years. I hoped that would count for something. It didn't. Chloe did all the talking. She sat beside me, her hand resting on my arm in a gesture of loving concern that felt like a manacle. She painted a masterful portrait of my supposed decline. She told Dr. Evans about the keys, the forgotten appointments I'd never made, the time I supposedly left the stove on a complete fabrication. She spoke in a hushed, worried tone, dabbing at a non-existent tear in the corner of her eye. He's just not himself lately. Doctor, she concluded, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. He gets angry so easily. And so confused. We're just so worried he's going to hurt himself. I tried to interject, that's not true. I'm just tired. Doctor, Evans gave me a kind, dismissive smile. It's all right. Arnold, it's common to feel a bit defensive. He turned back to Chloe, his expression softening with sympathy for her plight. You're doing the right thing by bringing him in. It sounds like we should run some cognitive tests, and perhaps we should discuss options for supervised care to ensure his safety. I felt the walls of the trap closing in. My own doctor, a man I trusted, was now an unwitting pawn in their game. My word meant nothing against their carefully constructed lies. I was no longer Arnold Miller, the man who had built a farm from nothing. I was a patient, a problem to be solved, a set of symptoms in a textbook. As we left, Chloe squeezed my arm. See, Dad, this is for the best, she whispered, her victory complete. The true chilling moment, the one that burned away any last flicker of doubt about their intentions, came a few nights later. We were in the living room. I was reading a book, or pretending to, while Ethan and Chloe watched some loud, violent action movie. A news report cut in during a commercial break. It was a story about a fire in a nearby town, started by an elderly man who had fallen asleep while cooking. Ethan, without taking his eyes off the screen, spoke into the air. His voice was casual, almost bored. It's dangerous for old folks to live alone, he said. Accidents happen all the time. The words hung in the quiet room, far more menacing than any gunshot from the movie. It wasn't a comment. It was a threat. A piece of poison dipped in casual conversation. A cold dread, colder than the night I'd watched them digging, washed over me. This wasn't just about stealing my money anymore. They were impatient. They were willing to create an accident to speed things along. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the darkness of my room, the veiled threat replaying in my mind. They weren't just trying to put me in a home, they were trying to bury me before I was dead. I walked into the bathroom and looked at my own reflection in the mirror. I saw what they saw, an old man, with lines etched deep into his face by time and worry, with hair the color of ash. But then I looked deeper, into my own eyes. And behind the performance of the frail, confused father, I saw a flicker of something else. It was the steel that had seen me through droughts, floods, and the heartbreak of burying a wife. It was the stubbornness of a farmer who refused to let his fields lie fallow. They had made a fatal miscalculation. They had mistaken age for weakness. The next morning, while they were at work, I drove my old truck into town, not to our usual grocery store, but to a big box store on the other side of the county. I paid cash for a cheap, prepaid cell phone, a burner phone. From the store's parking lot, I made a call. I found the number in an old address book I kept hidden away. The voice that answered was crisp and professional. Law offices of Chen and Associates. I'd like to speak with Mr. David Chen, I said, my voice steady. My name is Arnold Miller. It's a personal matter. David Chen was the lawyer who had handled my late sister's estate. I had only met him twice, but I remembered him as a sharp, no-nonsense man who didn't waste words. His office was in the city, an hour's drive away, located in a tall building of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. It was another world from the dusty fields of my farm. When I sat down in his conference room 2 days later, he looked at me with a polite, professional curiosity. I was just another elderly client, probably here to quibble over some minor detail in a will. Mr. Miller, he began. Your message said this was urgent. I didn't start with my feelings. I didn't talk about betrayal or heartbreak. I started with the facts. I told him about the sound of a shovel at 3 a.m. I described the metal box and its contents. I told him about the gaslighting, the campaign of manufactured forgetfulness. I told him about the doctor's appointment and the veiled threat Ethan had made while watching the news. I spoke calmly, laying out each event like a piece of evidence on the polished mahogany table between us. As I spoke, I saw the look on his face change. The polite professionalism was replaced by a sharp, focused intensity. He leaned forward, his pen hovering over a legal pad. He saw not a rambling, emotional victim, but a clear-headed man laying out the details of a conspiracy. When I finished, there was a long silence. Mr. Miller, he finally said, his voice quiet but firm. This is a very serious situation. This is elder abuse, conspiracy to commit fraud, a whole host of criminal and civil offenses, but I believe we can build a very strong case. He looked me straight in the eye. The question is, what do you want to do? I don't want to just stop them. Mr. Chen, I said, the cold fury solidifying into a plan in my mind. I want them to be held accountable for every single lie. I want the world to see them for who they really are. A slow, thin smile spread across David Chen's face. I think, he said, we can arrange that. The next few weeks were a blur of secret activity. I became a spy in my own home. On David's advice, I made another trip to the city. This time, to an electronics store. I bought a handful of tiny devices that looked like USB chargers and pens, but were actually high-fidelity audio recorders and cameras. I felt a strange surge of purpose as I read the tiny instruction manuals, my old farmer's hands. Accustomed to fixing tractors and mending fences. Learning a new, clandestine trade. I planted them throughout the house in the living room. the kitchen, my study. And then I waited. I continued my performance of the doddering old man. And they, in their arrogance, grew careless. They started talking openly when they thought I was napping upstairs. The recorders captured everything. I would retrieve the files late at night, my heart pounding as I transferred them to a secure laptop David had provided. The audio was a dagger to the heart, but it was also the ammunition I so desperately needed. I heard Chloe laughing about how easily Dr. Evans had believed their story. He totally bought it, she said, her voice dripping with contempt. He was practically ready to sign the commitment papers himself. I heard Ethan's cold, calculating response. Good. The lawyers will have a harder time fighting a doctor's recommendation. It's just a matter of time now. The market's good. We could sell the farm by spring. They weren't just taking my home. They were already spending the profits while they plotted my end. David and I were busy plotting theirs. We worked tirelessly. He drew up the paperwork to create a new limited liability company, a shell corporation with a bland, forgettable name. We began the process of legally transferring the bulk of my liquid assets, my life savings, into the company's accounts. Then, he drew up a new will. In it, Ethan and Chloe were mentioned by name, but only to be formally and explicitly disinherited. The farm, the house, the machinery, every last acre, was to be bequeathed to a new charitable foundation I was establishing, the Miller Foundation for the Aid of Abused Seniors. Their grand prize was vanishing into thin air. One Tuesday, I told them I was going into town to meet an old friend for lunch. Instead, I drove to the city. David had given me a key. I took the elevator to the 25th floor of a sleek, modern apartment building downtown. I unlocked the door to Penthouse B. It was the apartment my sister Sarah had left me. The one I'd never told Ethan and Chloe about. An asset they had no idea existed. I stepped inside. The air was still and quiet. The place was empty, unfurnished, but the floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city. It was a world away from the claustrophobic confines of the farm. Standing there, high above the noise and the grit, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt a surge of freedom, of possibility. This wasn't just an escape hatch. It was my future command center. It was the place my new life would begin. The close call came that Friday. I was in my study late at night, long after they had gone to bed. I had my headphones on, listening to the latest audio file on the secure laptop. It was a particularly damning conversation about pressuring me to give them power of attorney. I was so engrossed. I didn't hear the sound of Ethan's car pulling into the driveway. He was supposed to be out with friends. Suddenly, the floorboards in the hall creaked. My blood ran cold. I ripped the headphones off and slammed the laptop shut just as the study door swung open. Ethan stood there, holding a glass of water. "What ya doin', Dad?" he asked, his voice casual, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room, still playing with that old computer. My heart was a wild bird beating against my ribs. The burner phone was sitting on the desk, right next to the laptop. I slowly moved my hand to cover it. "Just reading the news," I said, my voice hoarse. "Couldn't sleep." He stared at me for a moment longer, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. But my face was a mask of weary confusion. The role I had perfected. He shrugged, apparently satisfied. "Well, to try to get some rest. You've been seeming really worn out lately." He turned and left, leaving me in the silence. my body trembling with adrenaline. It was too close. I had to act soon. They made their move the following week. They approached me after dinner. A united front of predatory concern. They sat me down at the kitchen table. The same table where we'd shared thousands of meals. Chloe placed a thick stack of papers in front of me. It was bound in a neat, professional-looking folder. "We love you, Dad," she began, her voice soft and cloying. "And because we love you, we can't stand by and watch you struggle anymore." Ethan picked up the narrative. "We've handled everything. We spoke with the people at Golden Meadows. They have a beautiful private room waiting for you. The staff is wonderful. You'll be safe there. Cared for." He slid the folder across the table until it was right in front of me. He uncapped a pen and placed it deliberately on top of the cover. "It's all taken care of," Chloe said, her smile not reaching her cold eyes. "All you have to do is sign here, Dad, and all your worries will be over." I looked down at the sheaf of papers, at the neat black line where my signature was supposed to go. The line that would sign away my life. A calculated tremor, born not of fear, but of tightly controlled rage, traveled up my arm and into my hand. I let the pen hover over the page for a moment. A piece of theater for my audience of two. I looked up, meeting Chloe's eager, predatory gaze, then shifted to Ethan, who was watching me with an unnerving, clinical detachment, like a scientist observing a specimen. They thought they were seeing a man break. The final collapse of a will they had worked so hard to erode. They had no idea they were watching a curtain rise. "All right," I said, my voice a dry, cracking whisper. I let my shoulders slump in a final, profound sigh of defeat. "You win. I'm just too tired to fight anymore." A flicker of triumph, quick and ugly, passed between them. It was the look of wolves who had finally cornered their prey. Chloe's smile widened, all teeth and no warmth. Ethan gave a short, sharp nod, the gesture of a deal being closed. With my deliberately trembling hand, I scrawled my name on the line. The signature was a messy, spidery thing. The signature of a man whose hand and spirit were broken. It was perfect. They watched the pen's every move, and as I lifted it from the page, a collective sigh of relief seemed to fill the room. A tension they hadn't realized they were holding, finally released. They had won. The farm was theirs. My life was theirs, to manage, to file away, to forget. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly know in their bubble of arrogant greed, was that the document I had just signed was a complete and utter sham. It was a masterful fake, drawn up by David Chen's paralegal, filled with legal jargon that sounded impressive but was entirely non-binding. The real admission papers, the ones with the power to strip me of my rights, were safely locked in David's office downtown. They had just proudly witnessed the signing of their own delusion. "You're doing the right thing, Dad," Ethan said, his voice now filled with a hollow, magnanimous warmth. He patted my shoulder, a gesture that felt both condescending and proprietary. The next morning, they were a flurry of cheerful, efficient activity. Chloe had bought a new, small suitcase for me. She packed it with a few changes of clothes, a toothbrush, and a single, framed photograph of my late wife. A cruel parody of sentimentality. "So you won't be lonely," she said with a bright, false smile. They moved around me, their words a constant stream of empty reassurances. "We'll come visit every weekend. Dad, We'll bring you your favorite cookies. You'll make new friends. They have a wonderful activities program. A woodworking shop even. Think of it as a permanent vacation. You've earned the rest. I let them lead me. A docile old man lost in a fog of confusion. I nodded at their empty promises. My face a mask of sad resignation. When the time came to leave, they walked me to their car. Ethan put the small suitcase in the trunk. Chloe fussed with my collar. Then, she leaned in and gave me a hug. It was a brief, brittle embrace. The hug one gives to a distant relative at a funeral. There was no warmth, no love, just the cool, papery feel of her skin and the faint, cloying scent of her perfume. "We love you, Dad," she whispered into my ear. It was the most profane lie she had ever told. I watched them drive away down the long gravel lane, my hand raised in a slow, feeble wave until the car was just a speck in the distance. They were heading to their jobs, planning to drop me off at Golden Meadows on their way home that evening. The final, neat disposal of their problem. The moment their car disappeared over the rise, the performance ended. The slump in my shoulders straightened. The vacant look in my eyes sharpened into a hard, focused glare. The frail, defeated old man they had just said goodbye to vanished as if he had never existed. I didn't waste a second. I walked back into the house. Not to my bedroom, but to the hall closet. Tucked away behind a stack of old blankets was another bag. A sturdy duffel I had packed myself weeks ago. It didn't contain pajamas and a toothbrush. It contained the secure laptop, a change of clothes for a different life, the burner phone, and a hard drive containing copies of every piece of evidence I had gathered. This was my go bag. I walked through the farmhouse one last time. Not with sentimentality, but with the cold efficiency of a soldier leaving a post. I didn't look at the photographs on the mantelpiece or the worn armchair where my wife used to sit. Those memories belonged to a life that was over, a life they had murdered. I walked out the back door, leaving it unlocked, and went to the barn. The old Ford truck started up with a familiar, rumbling cough. I backed it out and drove down the driveway. But I didn't turn towards town. I turned the other way, onto a back road that wound through miles of farmland. An hour later, I pulled into a long-term parking lot near the regional airport. I found a spot in a far corner, put the keys under the floor mat, and locked the doors. The truck, like the man they thought I was now a ghost. As I walked away, my duffel bag slung over my shoulder. A sleek, black sedan pulled up to the curb. The driver, a discreet professional hired by David, stepped out and opened the back door for me. I got in without a word. As the car pulled out onto the highway, heading towards the gleaming towers of the city, I did not look back. That evening, Ethan and Chloe returned home. I imagine they were feeling triumphant, a sense of finality and relief washing over them. The old man was finally settled. The farm was now theirs to control, to liquidate. Their future was secure. They probably poured themselves a drink, toasting to their success, to their cleverness. And then, they would have seen it. Sitting in the exact center of the polished kitchen table was a single, stark white envelope. It was unsealed. My name was not on it. I picture their confusion. Chloe picking it up, her brow furrowed, Ethan leaning over her shoulder. Inside was a single sheet of my best stationery. On it, I had written just 2 sentences. In my neatest, strongest handwriting. You thought I was a burden. Now, You get to see what a real burden looks like. Check your social media tomorrow at 9 a.m. Dad. The silence in that kitchen must have been deafening. The triumphant mood would have curdled into a cold, creeping dread. I imagine the frantic, escalating panic. Chloe's hands shaking. Ethan grabbing his phone, his fingers stabbing at my number, only to be met with the flat, dead tone of a disconnected line. They would have called Golden Meadows. Their voices tight with a rising hysteria, only to be told that no, a Mr. Arnold Miller was not expected. And no, he had not been checked in. They were no longer in control. The game they thought they had won had just been revealed to be a completely different game altogether. And they didn't even know the rules. While they were spiraling into chaos, I was in a state of absolute calm. I was in the penthouse, my command center. The large, empty space was now furnished with a simple desk and a comfortable chair, positioned to face the vast wall of windows. The city spread out below me. A glittering carpet of a million lights. A million stories. My war room was ready. On the desk was the secure laptop, open and glowing. A professional-grade microphone was plugged in, tested and ready. On the screen, I had arranged a series of digital files in a neat, orderly row: audio clips, video files, scanned financial documents, every piece of their treachery, digitized and weaponized. I took a deep, steadying breath. There was no anger left, no sadness. There was only a cold, clear sense of purpose. The next morning, at exactly 8:55 a.m., I went live. I had created the social media accounts weeks ago under a pseudonym, but had spent the night sending the link to a carefully curated list of people, their friends, their colleagues, the partners at Ethan's firm, members of their country club, and a handful of local journalists. I clicked the Start Stream button. I appeared on screen. I was not the man they had left behind yesterday. I was not wearing old flannel. I was in a crisp, dark button-down shirt. I was not in a dimly lit farmhouse. I was in a bright, modern space. The stunning city skyline clearly visible behind me. I looked directly into the camera, my face calm, my gaze unwavering. "Good morning," I began, my voice clear and strong, resonating with an authority they hadn't heard in years. "My name is Arnold Miller. For the past few months, my son, Ethan Miller, and his wife, Chloe Miller, have been telling everyone that I am losing my mind. They've told my doctor I'm senile. They've told their friends I'm a burden. Today, I'm here to set the record straight." I let that sink in for a moment. Then, I moved my mouse. "I'd like to play for you a recording," I said. "This was captured in my home 2 weeks ago, when they thought I was asleep upstairs." I played the first audio file. Their voices, tinny and sharp, filled the silence. Chloe's contemptuous laughter as she described fooling Dr. Evans, Ethan's cold, pragmatic voice, talking about selling the farm by spring. I played one clip after another. Their threats, their lies, their greed, laid bare for the world to hear. Then, I switched to the video. "This," I said, my voice cold as ice, "is from my backyard security camera. Filmed at 3 o'clock in the morning on October 12th. The grainy, night vision footage filled the screen. There they were, 2 shadowy figures, digging frantically. The world was now watching them bury my will, my life, my identity, but I had saved the best for last. My son and his wife have based their entire campaign on the idea that I am a financial burden, I said, pulling up a new set of documents on the screen. They believed I was a broke old man whose pension couldn't cover the costs of his own home. This is another lie. One by one, I revealed the truth. I showed them the incorporation documents for the LLC that now held the majority of my liquid assets. I showed them the deed to the penthouse I was currently sitting in, an asset worth over $500,000. I showed them the final, notarized copy of my new will, explicitly disinheriting them both and leaving the multi-million-dollar farm to a charitable foundation. I systematically, ruthlessly, dismantled the entire premise of their betrayal. I wasn't a liability they needed to manage. I was a wealthy, independent man they had tried to defraud. In their suburban home, I know they were watching. I can picture their faces, the blood draining from them, their masks of disbelief curdling into raw panic. Their phones would be exploding with notifications, texts from horrified friends, emails from stunned colleagues. Their carefully constructed world was not just cracking, it was being vaporized in real time. Live on the internet. I let the final document, the new will, linger on the screen. I leaned forward, looking directly into the camera one last time, my eyes finding theirs through the digital void. "Justice," I said, my voice low and steady, "is coming for you." I ended the stream. The screen went black, and in the profound silence of the penthouse, I could almost hear it. A sound that was beginning hundreds of miles away, but was rushing towards them with the inevitability of fate. It was the faint, distant, and rapidly growing sound of sirens. I clicked the end stream button. The screen went black, and the profound silence of the penthouse rushed in to fill the void. For a moment, there was nothing but the quiet hum of the city 25 stories below. A distant, indifferent pulse, the adrenaline that had been coursing through my veins for the past hour began to recede, leaving behind a strange and hollow calm. I had fired the cannon. The shot had been sent across the bow, and now all I could do was wait for the sound of the impact. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 10 minutes later, my burner phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from David Chen. It contained no words, only a link to a local news station's website. I clicked it. The headline was stark and sensational: "Local accountant and wife accused of elder abuse in shocking livestream." Below it was a grainy screenshot from my broadcast, my own determined face. A phantom on a million screens. A live helicopter feed was already playing, showing a bird's-eye view of a quiet suburban street I knew all too well. My street. My house. The frame was filled with the flashing blue and red lights of police cars, painting the manicured lawns and pristine houses in frantic, strobing colors of crisis. I watched, detached, as two figures were led from the front door of my home, their home. They had thought, even from that height, I could recognize their postures of defeat. Ethan, his shoulders slumped, his head bowed, a pathetic imitation of the weary old man I had pretended to be. Chloe, her face hidden in her hands, her carefully constructed facade of suburban elegance shattered into a million pieces. The flashing lights reflected off their pale, stunned faces as they were guided into the back of separate squad cars. The justice I had promised was no longer an abstract concept. It was here. It was real. And it was merciless. The trial was 3 months later, a period that felt both like a lifetime and the blink of an eye. David had insisted I not return to the farm. that I remain in the city, safe and insulated from the media storm that erupted. The story was everywhere. The live stream legacy. One paper called it, "The Farmer's Revenge." Said another, I was no longer a private citizen. I was a symbol. When the day came to testify, I walked into the courtroom, feeling not nervous, but resolute. The room was a theater of quiet tension. The wooden benches were hard, the air thick with the smell of old paper and cheap disinfectant. Ethan and Chloe sat at the defendant's table. They had changed. The 3 months of legal battles and public shame had taken their toll. Ethan was thinner, his expensive suit hanging off his frame. His face was sallow, his eyes dark and haunted. Chloe, who had always been so meticulous about her appearance, looked haggard. Her hair was limp, her makeup unable to hide the deep face. Dark circles under her eyes. They refused to look at me. Their lawyer, a slick man with a practiced, sympathetic voice, tried to paint me as a vindictive, senile old man. He argued that the recordings were taken out of context, that the live stream was the act of a confused mind lashing out. It was a pathetic defense, and it crumbled to dust under the weight of the evidence. The most powerful moment came when David played the audio clips for the court, the sound of their voices. My son's voice filled the hushed courtroom. The jury listened, their faces impassive, but their eyes fixed on the speakers. They heard Chloe laughing about fooling Dr. Evans. They heard Ethan's cold calculation as he discussed selling the farm. They heard his veiled threat about accidents. In the sterile silence of that courtroom, their words were not just whispers in a living room, they were confessions. When the video from the security camera played, a collective gasp went through the gallery. The grainy, black and white footage of them digging in the dead of night, like ghouls in their own backyard, was damning. It wasn't just about a will anymore. It was about the desecration of trust, the burial of love. When the verdict was read, I felt no elation, no triumphant surge of joy. I just felt a profound, quiet finality. Guilty, on all counts. Larceny, conspiracy to commit fraud, and felony elder abuse. Ethan was sentenced to 5 years in state prison. Chloe, 3. They were also ordered to pay me $200,000 in restitution, a sum I knew they no longer had. As they were led away in handcuffs for the final time, Ethan finally looked at me. His eyes were not filled with remorse. They were filled with a hollow, bottomless hatred, the look of a son who blamed his father not for his crime, but for being caught. In that moment, the little boy I had once loved was gone forever. The consequences cascended, a total and complete annihilation of the life they had built on a foundation of lies. Ethan's prestigious accounting firm fired him the day after the live stream, issuing a public statement denouncing his actions. Chloe was stripped of her memberships in her various social clubs and charities. Her name now, a toxic stain on their letterheads. Their friends, the ones they had vacationed with and hosted for dinner parties, evaporated like mist in the morning sun. No one wanted to be associated with them. They were forced to sell their house to cover their mounting legal fees. But the public notoriety of the case had tainted the property. They sold it at a massive loss. The life of luxury they had craved, the one they were willing to destroy me for, was gone. They had lost everything: their freedom, their home, their careers, their reputation. They had reached for a golden prize and had ended up with nothing but ashes in their hands. While their world was collapsing, I was beginning to build a new one. I finally returned to the farm, not as a victim, but as its custodian, the familiar scent of the earth no longer felt like a reminder of the past, but a promise of the future. With David's help, I finalized the creation of the Miller Foundation. I hired architects and contractors, not to build bigger barns, but to transform the main farmhouse and surrounding buildings. We redesigned it to be a beautiful, comfortable, and, most importantly, safe residence. We called it Miller's Promise. It was to be a sanctuary, a place of refuge for elderly individuals who had been victims of abuse or neglect by their own families. A place where they could live out their days in dignity and peace, free of charge. The work gave me a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I was no longer just tending to crops, I was tending to a legacy. I was taking the ugliest chapter of my life and turning it into something good, something that would outlive me. I was taking the soil they had used to bury my life and using it to grow a garden of hope for others. A year after the sentencing, a letter arrived at my penthouse apartment. The envelope was thin. The return address, stark and institutional, a state correctional facility. The handwriting was Ethan's, but it was different now, less a confident scrawl, more a cramped, pleading script. For a full day, I left it on the kitchen counter, unopened. Part of me wanted to burn it, to erase this final, desperate communication from my life. But another part, a foolish, fatherly part I thought had died, needed to know. I finally opened it that evening. It was 4 pages long, a rambling, self-pitying monologue disguised as an apology. He wrote of the horrors of prison, the daily degradation, the loss of his identity. He said he had made a mistake, that he had been misled by Chloe's ambition. He wrote that he thought of me every day and that he hoped, when he was released, that we could somehow rebuild what we had lost. He was asking for forgiveness. He was asking for his father back. But as I read his words, I felt nothing. No pity. No anger. Not even a flicker of the old love. His letter was just another manipulation. Another performance. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he was in prison. He was sorry he had lost. I walked over to a locked file cabinet and pulled out a single, folded bundle of papers tied with a faded blue ribbon. It was the letter I had written to my sister Sarah, the one they had dug up, my Chekhov's gun. I sat down and read it again. My own words, from 3 years prior, echoing back to me. I read about my love for Ethan, my hopes for his future, and the creeping, heartbreaking fear that I was losing him to a coldness I couldn't understand. I remembered the profound pain and loneliness I felt writing it. That was the man they had tried to destroy. I put the old letter away. I took out a fresh sheet of my own stationery, the same kind I had used for the note I left on the kitchen table. I uncapped my pen. I thought about all the things I could say, all the pain I could pour onto the page. But I realized it would be a waste of breath. There was nothing left to say. I wrote a single line. Monsters don't deserve forgiveness. I folded the paper, sealed it in an envelope, and sent it back to the prison the next day. It was the last time I would ever communicate with my son. Now, I am 70 years old. My life is quiet, but it is my own. I split my time between the peace of the farm, watching Miller's Promise blossom into a thriving community, and the vibrant energy of my city penthouse. This evening, I am sitting on my balcony, a glass of iced tea in my hand, watching the sun set behind the skyscrapers. The city lights are beginning to twinkle on, a galaxy of lives and stories. My phone rings. It's the director of the foundation. She tells me about a new resident who arrived today. A woman in her 80s whose children had stolen her life savings. She tells me the woman cried when she saw her new room. With its clean sheets and the vase of fresh flowers from the garden. She said the woman told her, "I thought my life was over. But this feels like a beginning." A sense of profound, unshakable peace settles over me. I hang up the phone and look out at the vast, sprawling city. I think about Ethan and Chloe, locked away in their separate cells. Their worlds shrunk to the size of a concrete box. I think about the life they tried to take from me. They thought my age was my biggest weakness. It was, but not for me. For them. They underestimated the old man, and that was the last and most devastating mistake they ever made.